So, we said that one of the principal ways that we can find out about brains is from pathologies, when things go wrong. Now, there's a great problem with pathologies, which is that they are completely uncontrolled, and every case is its own case, and every case is messy. If someone gets a bullet to the head or a tumor grows, it doesn't do so in a controlled fashion. And so generalization from any specific finding is always difficult. And there's the logical problem that you're looking at a broken system. It would be very difficult to figure out how cars work if all you ever saw was broken cars. However, we have learned a great deal from such stories, and the first, most famous case in the literature combines the theme of we just met, which is the association of a function with a place, and pathology, and it comes from a chap you may have heard of called Phineas Gage, who had a very bad experience. He was the foreman of a railway construction gang working out in Vermont in 1848, and what they were doing was using explosives to quarry rock, to move rock, and that meant drilling a hole in each case and putting some gunpowder in, and then you tamp it down with a tamping rod, and then you put in the charge and you stand back and you light a fuse, and boom, when all goes well. But what happened with him was he was doing the tamping and a spark was generated, and it caused the explosion, the explosive to detonate prematurely, which sent the tamping rod flying out of the hole, and it entered above his left eye here and left through the top of his skull. And in fact, from the slide there, you can see precisely the location of the path. Phineas Gage's skull is still preserved. The skull flew in and out and landed far behind him. He was knocked over. He may have been knocked out briefly, but we're not quite sure. But he had medical help very, very quickly. And amazingly, he wasn't killed. And he came to the attention of many doctors. They studied his case carefully, and he made a remarkable recovery of sorts. When he came back to work, it was found that he had changed. He was described as no longer Gage. He was where he'd previously been a very level-headed, competent, affable kind of guy. He became difficult to deal with, bad temper. There it says that he was fitful, irreverent, impatient, obstinate. So he seemed to have a change in his overall personality. And this association of something so human as a change in personality is a very human kind of thing. It's not a meat kind of thing, it's a person kind of thing. And this attracted the immediate attention of doctors who pursued the case and came to theorize that the personality of a person bore an interesting relation to the frontal lobes of the brain. Now, we've met the frontal lobes before. The frontal lobe of the human brain is extremely large compared to other animals. It's also very mysterious. It's the part of the brain that's furthest away from the sensory periphery or the motor effectors. So it's very hard to know what's going on in there. In the slide, you can see the tamping iron that Phineas Gage endured, and recently a photo emerged of him. This is actually Phineas Gage. His story got legs because it seemed to provide evidence of a link between a high-level human sort of thing like personality and a specific place in the brain. It kick-started, I suppose, the business of modern cognitive neuropsychology interpreting pathological cases, interrogating these cases to see what can we learn from this specific and messy, it must be said, example. Lots of legends have sprung up about Phineas Gage since then. It was reported that he never worked again, that he went off and joined a circus as a sideshow freak, that he went to Mexico, that he did get better, that he was able to work again. He's become because he's such an interesting character, he's become of interest to historians as well. One unfortunate exaggeration of the approach that was launched with his case study was the business of psychosurgery or lobotomy. This was a medical approach which sought to control behaviors that were unbearable for those around them, so to control the insane and the criminal by basically inserting something like knitting needles above the eye and destroying that part of the brain. What you find is if you do that to someone, they can become very docile. This was a terrible, terrible, terrible kind of intervention, but it was done in the first half and up until I think about the 1960s. Lobotomies were still carried out. One lesson that people have drawn from this is the idea that something called higher cognitive functions, like reason or the capacity to deliberate or the business of exerting self-control, and the general structure and character of your personality might bear a close association to the frontal lobes. And remember what we just said about phrenology. Associating a function with a place in the brain is an old mistake that we should be over. We still do this all the time. This seems like a good opportunity to encourage you to get to know the brain a little bit. We're not going to do brain anatomy in any great detail. We've met these four lobes of the cerebral cortex before. So the brain is organized, it's symmetrical, bilaterally symmetrical in each hemisphere. On the outside we get this wrinkly surface which we divide into four major lobes: the temporal lobe above the ears here, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe on top, and the occipital lobe that we met when we studied vision. And hanging beneath the whole thing is the cerebellum, which is like a mini brain. It's a lot older, and we'll meet that when we study movement. And then there are many other structures buried deep in there. In the case of Phineas Gage, we're interested in the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is the largest of the four lobes. It's sometimes divided into a front and a back part itself. The prefrontal area is the very front, and that's the part that Phineas Gage blasted away. And the back half of the frontal lobe we will meet again when we come to study movement. It's very important in the organization of coordinated movement, and so it's often considered to be a premotor area. Lots of controversy, lots of room for controversy here. When you meet papers and books and articles talking about the brain, it might be good to have a little map yourself, and I want to recommend this little piece of software here. It's available free, it works cross-platform. It's called Brain Voyager, and it provides you with a nice way of exploring the brain yourself. And you can display the brain in various kind of conventional projections. You can identify the principal structures in the brain, and it's carefully designed as a pedagogical tool for learning about the brain. So I'd recommend that.